In the remote wilderness of northern Minnesota, 12-year-old Ethan stumbles upon two shivering wolf cubs buried beneath fallen pine branches during the season's first heavy snowfall. Their tiny bodies, barely visible against the white landscape, trembled with each labored breath. With no mother in sight and darkness approaching, Ethan makes a decision that would forever alter his life's path. Carefully wrapping them inside his down jacket, he carries them back to his grandfather's cabin, where they spend the night huddled near the wood stove, their fragile lives hanging in the balance. By morning, their strength returns, but so does their mother, a magnificent silver wolf with piercing amber eyes, standing silently at the edge of the clearing watching. What secrets could this wild creature possibly reveal about Ethan's own mysterious past? What ancient connection binds this boy to the wilderness he's always felt drawn to? Ethan awoke with a start, sunlight streaming through the cabin's frost-covered windows. The wolf cubs had survived the night, their tiny bodies now curled together in a makeshift nest of blankets near the dying embers of the wood stove. His grandfather Jacob stood at the window, weathered hands gripping a steaming mug of coffee, his gaze fixed on something outside. "She's been there since dawn," Jacob said, his voice low and graveled with age. "Just watching, waiting." Ethan joined his grandfather at the window. There, at the edge of the clearing where forest met field, stood the mother wolf. Her silver coat shimmered in the morning light, her amber eyes fixed directly on the cabin. She made no move to approach, yet her intention was unmistakable. "I should take them to her," Ethan said, reaching for his coat. Jacob's hand fell firmly on his shoulder. "Boy, you don't follow wild animals into these woods, especially not wolves." He pulled his old compass from his pocket, the brass casing worn smooth from decades of use. "This forest can turn you around faster than you'd believe. Your grandmother gave me this compass the day we built this place. Said even a man who thinks he knows the way needs guidance sometimes." The cubs stirred as Ethan approached, their eyes, blue-gray and not yet shifted to adult color, regarding him with surprising recognition. He gathered them gently in his arms, their bodies substantially warmer and more energetic than the night before. "I'll just return them and come straight back," Ethan promised. Zipping his jacket against the morning chill, Jacob sighed, knowing the stubborn set of the boy's jaw all too well. "That compass was your grandmother's final gift to me. Take it, and be back before noon, or I'm coming after you." Outside, the wolf watched as Ethan approached with her offspring. He stopped 20 yards away, kneeling to set the cubs on the snow-covered ground. Instead of bounding immediately to their mother, they circled Ethan's legs, nipping playfully at his boots before finally trotting to the waiting adult. What happened next defied everything Jacob had warned. Instead of retreating into the forest with her recovered young, the mother wolf turned and walked several paces into the trees, then stopped, looking back at Ethan expectantly. "She wants me to follow," Ethan whispered to himself, the compass solid in his palm. He'd only been living with his grandfather for 3 months, ever since the accident that took both his parents. City-raised, but always drawn to nature documentaries and wilderness books, Ethan had surprised Jacob with his intuitive understanding of the forest despite limited exposure. Something about these woods felt like a homecoming to the boy, though he'd never set foot here until this fall. The wolf moved deeper into the trees, stopping periodically to ensure Ethan followed. The cubs bounded alongside, occasionally disappearing into the underbrush, only to emerge farther ahead. Ethan checked the compass regularly, marking their general direction northeast, deeper into the uncharted sections of forest that his grandfather had specifically warned him against. An hour into their journey, the terrain changed. The gentle slopes gave way to rockier ground, with ancient pines towering overhead, blocking much of the morning light. Ethan should have felt fear, lost in unknown territory, following a wild predator. Yet something deeper than reason told him he was safe. The wolf slowed her pace as they approached a dense wall of vegetation. To the untrained eye, it appeared to be an impenetrable thicket, but she moved confidently toward a narrow gap, nearly invisible unless viewed from the precise angle of their approach. The cubs slipped through effortlessly, disappearing from view. Their mother paused, turning those intelligent amber eyes toward Ethan once more. A strange sensation washed over him, not quite words, not quite feelings, but something between, carrying a clear message. Follow. Ethan squeezed through the narrow passage, branches catching at his clothing. He emerged into a hidden clearing, perfectly circular and ringed by towering pines. At its center stood something that stopped him in his tracks, his breath forming small clouds in the cold morning air. There, partially obscured by decades of nature's reclamation, stood a cabin. Not a modern structure like his grandfather's, but something far older. Hand-hewn logs darkened with age, a stone chimney leaning slightly to one side, windows clouded with grime, but remarkably intact. The wolf and her cubs waited patiently at what had once been a front door, now hanging precariously from a single rusted hinge. The compass in Ethan's hand suddenly felt heavier, as though pulling him forward toward this impossible discovery. Something about this place called to him in ways he couldn't articulate, a familiarity that made no rational sense, yet resonated bone deep. The wolf watched him, her gaze unwavering. As Ethan took his first hesitant steps toward the abandoned cabin and whatever secrets lay within, Ethan approached the abandoned cabin with cautious steps, each footfall crunching in the frozen underbrush. The wolf remained by the tilted door, her cubs playfully tumbling nearby, seemingly unconcerned with the strangeness of the situation. As Ethan drew closer, he noticed peculiar details that heightened his curiosity. The cabin's construction was expert craftsman's work, not the rough shelter of a temporary hunter. The wood, though weathered, had been selected and placed with precision. Someone had meant this place to last. "What is this place?" Ethan whispered, not expecting an answer. The wolf merely tilted her head, amber eyes fixed on him with unsettling intelligence. The door hung awkwardly, threatening to fall with the slightest touch. Beside it, partially concealed by overgrown moss, lay a large stone carved with a simple spiral pattern. Something about the stone's placement seemed deliberate rather than decorative. Ethan knelt and carefully rolled it aside, revealing a small hollow beneath. Inside lay a rusted iron key, its design intricate despite the corrosion of time. Ethan held the key up, examining the unusual teeth and ornate handle. "This has been here a long time," he murmured. The wolf made a soft sound, almost like encouragement. With gentle pressure, Ethan tested the door. It groaned in protest, but held firm where the ancient lock mechanism still engaged. The key slid in with surprising ease, as though it had been waiting for this moment. A quarter turn, and the internal tumblers shifted with an audible click. The door swung inward on its remaining hinge, releasing the musty scent of enclosed space and forgotten memories. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light, penetrating the grimy windows. The cabin's interior was a single room with a small loft above. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold for what must have been decades. What struck Ethan immediately was how the cabin didn't feel ransacked or abandoned in panic. Rather, it had the air of a place carefully closed up, its contents arranged with purpose before being left to time's slow erasure. A wooden table stood beneath the largest window, covered with research equipment now antiquated, magnifying glasses, notebooks filled with tight, precise handwriting, and what appeared to be tracking maps of the surrounding forest. Carefully labeled specimen jars lined crude shelves, their contents long since deteriorated into unrecognizable matter. The wolf entered behind him, her cubs following with none of the hesitation a wild animal should show toward human habitation. They moved through the space with the ease of familiarity, settling near the cold fireplace as though it were a routine. Ethan ran his fingers over the table's surface, revealing the rich patina of the wood beneath decades of dust. Journals were stacked chronologically, their leather bindings cracked but still intact. He opened the topmost volume, finding the flyleaf inscription, "Field Notes of Thomas Reed, Wildlife Research Station No. 7, 1973. The pages contain detailed observations of wolf behavior, pack structures, hunting patterns, and communication methods, far more advanced than anything Ethan had seen in his school textbooks. Interspersed with scientific notation were more personal reflections, the handwriting occasionally shifting to something more urgent, more passionate. "They're trying to communicate," one passage read. "Not just with each other, but with me. The conventional wisdom is wrong. There's a language here, if only I could understand it." Photographs pinned to the wall above the table showed a bearded man in his 30s, standing in this very clearing in various seasons. In several images, wolf pups played at his feet, wolves that, judging by markings, could be ancestors of the very cubs now exploring the cabin floor. Ethan's attention was drawn to a particular photograph, partially hidden behind others. The man stood with a young woman, her long dark hair and sharp cheekbones triggering a shock of recognition in Ethan. She looked remarkably like his mother. The cabin's exposed beams overhead were carved with symbols, spirals, paw prints, and more complex patterns that Ethan couldn't identify, but which stirred something deep in his memory. The wolf watched him intently as his fingers traced one particular carving, a sensation like static electricity tingling through his hand. In the cabin's far corner stood a simple wooden chest. Unlike everything else in the room, it appeared to have been disturbed more recently, its lid not quite aligned with its base. Ethan approached it slowly, aware of the wolf's gaze following him. Inside lay children's clothing from decades past, a small collection of handcrafted toys, and beneath them all, a weathered photograph in a silver frame. Ethan lifted it carefully, wiping away the dust with his sleeve. His breath caught in his throat. The photograph showed a young boy around his own age, with the same unruly brown hair and sharp grey eyes that greeted Ethan in the mirror each morning. The resemblance was uncanny, impossible, yet undeniable. The wolf padded silently to his side, her muzzle gently nudging his hand that held the photograph. As though confirming what he was struggling to comprehend, Ethan placed the photograph back in the chest with trembling hands. The boy's resemblance to him couldn't be coincidence, yet he had no explanation for it. Turning his attention back to the cabin, he began a more methodical exploration, brushing away decades of dust from shelves and drawers. The research equipment was extensive: calipers, specimen containers, a microscope missing its eyepiece, and what appeared to be early recording devices. In one corner stood a ham radio setup, its dials frozen with age. Ethan found a leather-bound journal different from the others, thicker, its cover embossed with a wolf silhouette. Opening it revealed handwriting that started neat, but grew increasingly urgent over the pages. "Breakthrough today," read an entry from spring 1974. "Female wolf number 3, Silver, demonstrated unprecedented comprehension. Not mere conditioning or reward response. She anticipated my intent before I signaled. Communication exists beyond our limited understanding. Evidence suggests wolves maintain complex inherited memories, knowledge passed generationally that exceeds instinct." Ethan glanced at the silver wolf now resting by the cold hearth. Could she be a descendant of the one mentioned? The journal continued with increasingly radical theories about cross-species communication channels and shared consciousness pathways. Thomas Reed documented experiments measuring wolf responses to various stimuli, noting patterns that defied conventional zoological understanding. "They're trying to tell us something," one passage declared, underlined 3 times. "The barrier isn't their intelligence, it's our inability to perceive how they communicate." The wolf rose suddenly, moving purposefully to a section of wall near the fireplace. She scratched lightly at the base, looking back at Ethan expectantly. He knelt beside her, running his fingers over the rough-hewn logs until he felt an inconsistency, a panel that moved slightly under pressure. Pushing it revealed a small compartment containing scientific instruments wrapped in oilcloth. Ethan carefully unwrapped them, finding specialized recording equipment with headphones and a notebook filled with numerical sequences. The final page contained a hasty note: "Signal frequency identified. They operate beyond human auditory range, but within cognitive perception. Company representatives arriving tomorrow. Must secure primary findings elsewhere. If found, continue at coordinates. The rest of the page was torn away, leaving the location unknown. A sound outside, branches snapping under heavy boots, startled Ethan. The wolf's ears pricked forward, her posture instantly alert. Through the grimy window, Ethan spotted his grandfather's familiar form entering the clearing. Expression somewhere between worry and disbelief. Jacob entered the cabin cautiously, his weathered face paling as he took in the interior. His gaze moved from Ethan to the wolf, then to the research equipment on the table. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally, voice uncharacteristically tight. "How did you find this place?" Ethan gestured to the wolf. "She brought me. The cubs I saved, this is where they live." Jacob's eyes narrowed. "No wolf makes its den in a human structure. These do. Look at how comfortable they are here. And there's all this research about wolf communication and intelligence." Ethan held up the leather journal. "Someone named Thomas Reed was studying them. Do you know anything about him?" Jacob's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Shock, followed by something like resignation. He sank onto a dust-covered chair, suddenly looking every one of his 72 years. "Thomas Reed," he repeated softly. "That's a name I haven't heard spoken aloud in a very long time. Did you know him?" "There's a photograph that looks like—" Ethan hesitated, uncertain how to express the impossible similarity he'd discovered. The wolf approached Jacob, showing none of the caution a wild animal should display. She sniffed his outstretched hand, then looked between the two humans, as though attempting to communicate something vital. "She knows you," Ethan said. Watching the interaction closely, Jacob nodded slowly. "We've crossed paths before." He sighed deeply, running a hand through his silver hair. "I didn't think you'd find this place so soon. Your grandmother always said the forest would reveal its secrets when the time was right. But I hoped for more time to prepare you." "Prepare me for what? What's going on here?" Ethan demanded. "This cabin, these woods, they're part of your history, boy. A history I've kept from you because I wasn't sure you were ready." Jacob looked up at the carved beams overhead. "Your mother left all this behind for a reason." "My mother? She knew this place?" "She grew up here for a time." Jacob stood, his decision made. "I'll tell you what I can, but not here. It'll be dark soon, and these woods change after sunset. We should head back." "We're coming back tomorrow," Ethan stated firmly, not a question. Jacob looked at the wolf, something unspoken passing between them. "Yes, there are things you need to learn. Things only this place can teach you." He picked up the leather journal, tucking it carefully into his coat. "But you need to understand what you're stepping into first." As they left, the wolf remained at the cabin door, watching them depart with those intelligent amber eyes. Ethan turned back once to see her silhouetted against the darkening forest, a sentinel guarding secrets that had waited patiently for his return. The journey back to Jacob's cabin had been silent, both humans lost in their thoughts. Ethan lay awake most of the night, the leather journal open beside him, trying to make sense of Thomas Reed's increasingly passionate notations about wolf intelligence. By morning, his determination had only grown stronger. "I'm going back today," Ethan announced over breakfast, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Jacob studied his grandson over steaming coffee. "I figured as much," he sighed, shoulders dropping slightly. "Your mother had that same look when she'd made up her mind. Will you tell me about her connection to that place?" "To Thomas Reed?" "Some," Jacob conceded. "The rest you'll need to discover yourself. That's how these things work." He checked his watch. "Be careful what you touch there. Some knowledge comes with responsibility." With his grandfather's reluctant blessing, Ethan returned to the hidden cabin shortly after noon. The wolf was waiting at the edge of the clearing as though she'd been expecting him. The cubs bounded around his legs, significantly more energetic than the freezing creatures he'd rescued days earlier. Inside the cabin, Ethan began carefully cataloguing Thomas Reed's research notes, organizing them chronologically. The progression was fascinating, starting with traditional wildlife observation before veering into territory that would have branded Reed an eccentric in scientific circles. Yet his methodology remained rigorous, his documentation meticulous. The wolf watched from nearby, her attention focused on Ethan's every movement. The cubs explored the cabin with the carefree curiosity of the young, occasionally bringing Ethan small objects in what seemed like deliberate gestures. A pencil, a small brass button, a wooden whistle. "Are you trying to show me something?" Ethan asked the mother wolf directly. She rose immediately, moving to the far wall where crude shelving held specimen jars and field equipment. With her nose, she indicated a particular section of wall that appeared solid. Ethan ran his fingers along the rough-hewn logs, feeling for inconsistencies similar to the hidden compartment he'd discovered the day before. A small section of the wall moved under pressure. Unlike the previous hiding spot, this one was deeply recessed, requiring Ethan to reach in up to his shoulder. His fingers brushed against something cool and smooth, stone, not wood or metal. He carefully extracted a flat, palm-sized stone amulet, its surface carved with intricate wolf images surrounding a central spiral design. The moment the amulet settled into his palm, a curious warmth spread through Ethan's hand, up his arm, and throughout his body. The sensation wasn't uncomfortable, but it was undeniably strange, like static electricity, but somehow deeper, resonating in his bones rather than on his skin. More startling were the flashes of unfamiliar images that accompanied the sensation, fragments of forest seen from perspectives too low to the ground to be human, sense described visually as colors, emotions that weren't quite his own. Ethan gasped, nearly dropping the amulet before the impressions faded, leaving him disoriented but fascinated. Flipping through Reed's journals with renewed purpose, Ethan found references to psychosensory artifacts and empathic focusing tools associated with regional indigenous traditions. One passage specifically mentioned an amulet. The stone carving seems to facilitate the neural pathways necessary for cross-species empathic reception. Local legends speak of memory keepers, individuals who could access the collective experiences of forest guardians. Science would dismiss such accounts as folklore, but my experiences suggest a biological basis for these phenomena. The wolves respond to it, especially Silver, who seems to recognize its significance from ancestral memory. Ethan looked up at the wolf. Could she be descended from the Silver in Reed's notes? The amulet felt heavier than its physical weight warranted, as though laden with significance he was only beginning to comprehend. A notation in the journal's margin caught his eye. The guardians maintain balance. The memory keepers preserve wisdom. When human and wolf speak as one, the forest remembers its voice. With tentative curiosity, Ethan hung the amulet around his neck. The effect was immediate and profound, his senses sharpened dramatically. The cabin filled with information previously inaccessible, lingering scents, telling stories of past occupants, subtle sounds from deep in the forest now clearly distinguishable, the quiet breathing of the wolf pack resonating with meaning beyond mere sound. Most astonishing was his new awareness of the wolf herself. Not words exactly, but intentions and impressions flowed from her. Approval, encouragement, and a pressing urgency about something Ethan couldn't yet fully interpret. He moved to the window, gazing out at the forest with new perception. The trees weren't merely physical objects. They were presences, each with its own subtle energy. The wind carried whispers that tickled at the edges of his comprehension, like a language he'd once known but forgotten. "What's happening to me?" Ethan whispered. The wolf moved beside him, her shoulder against his leg. Through their contact came a clear impression, not quite words, but unmistakable in meaning. "You are remembering what humans have forgotten." Ethan's hand moved instinctively to the amulet, his fingers tracing the carved spiral. "Who am I supposed to be in all this?" No answer came in words, but as the afternoon light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the clearing, Ethan could have sworn he heard whispers in the wind, calling a name he almost recognized. That evening, Ethan sat at his grandfather's kitchen table, the stone amulet resting between them like a silent mediator. He'd recounted the day's experiences, struggling to find words for sensations that defied conventional description. Jacob had listened without interruption, his weathered face revealing neither surprise nor disbelief. "I need to understand what's happening," Ethan concluded. "These aren't just stories or someone's imagination." "I felt something real today," Jacob nodded slowly. "There's someone you should meet." "I was hoping to wait, but—" He glanced at the amulet. "The forest has its own timeline." The next morning found them driving Jacob's old pickup down narrow back roads, deeper into the countryside than Ethan had ventured since arriving 3 months ago. They eventually turned onto an unmarked dirt track that wound through dense pine forest before opening onto a modest clearing where several cabins surrounded a central fire pit. The reservation boundary extends farther than most maps show, Jacob explained as they parked. "Samuel keeps to the old ways out here. His grandfather was friends with mine, and he knows more about these woods than anyone alive." A tall, broad-shouldered man with long silver hair tied back in a neat braid emerged from the largest cabin. Despite his apparent 70-plus years, he moved with the fluid grace of someone half his age. His dark eyes, set in a face mapped with smile lines and wisdom, fixed immediately on Ethan. "Jacob Blackwood," he called, voice strong and melodious. "You finally brought the boy." His gaze dropped to the amulet around Ethan's neck, and something like satisfaction crossed his features. "And I see the forest has already begun its work." "Samuel Blackfeather," Jacob greeted with respectful familiarity. "This is my grandson, Ethan." "I know who he is," Samuel replied simply. He gestured toward his cabin. "Come, there's much to discuss." Inside, the cabin was warm and fragrant with herbs hanging from ceiling beams. Modern conveniences existed alongside traditional elements. A laptop beside handcrafted drums. Electric lights illuminating walls covered with intricate woodland scenes painted on hide. Samuel gestured for them to sit at a round table of polished wood, its surface inlaid with the same spiral pattern Ethan had seen on the amulet. Without preamble, Samuel extended his hand. "May I see what the forest has returned to you?" Hesitantly, Ethan removed the amulet and placed it in the elder's palm. Samuel closed his eyes briefly, a smile touching the corners of his mouth. "This was carved by my great-grandfather," he said quietly. "Given to a young researcher who showed unusual respect for the old ways. Thomas Reed understood what few outsiders ever grasp, that knowledge flows in both directions if we're humble enough to listen." "You knew Thomas Reed?" Ethan asked eagerly. "I was a boy when he first came to these woods. Later I helped him understand what was happening as his connection with the wolves deepened." Samuel returned the amulet. "The stone amplifies what's already within you. It doesn't create anything new. Within me. But I'm just—" Ethan trailed off, uncertain how to continue. Samuel leaned forward. "For countless generations, certain individuals have served as bridges between the human and natural worlds. Our people called them memory keepers, those who could understand the language of animals, particularly the wolves who serve as guardians of the forest's deepest knowledge. But I'm not," Ethan gestured to Samuel, "and the indigenous artifacts around them. The gift doesn't follow bloodlines the way people expect," Samuel replied. "It chooses its vessels. Your mother carried the potential but turned away from it. Now it seeks expression through you." Jacob shifted uncomfortably. "Sarah had her reasons, Samuel." "She did," the elder acknowledged. "Corporate interests have long sought the knowledge Thomas Reed began to uncover. When they couldn't control it, they tried to destroy it. Your mother chose to protect you by keeping you away from all this." From a cedar chest nearby, Samuel retrieved a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. He carefully unwrapped it, revealing a collection of herbs, feathers, and small carved tokens bound with sinew. "A medicine bundle," he explained, pushing it toward Ethan. "Protection for those who walk between worlds. The path of a memory keeper attracts both reverence and danger." "I don't understand any of this," Ethan admitted. "Yesterday I was just a normal kid. Now you're talking about me being some kind of—" What animal whisperer? Samuel laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Much more than that. The wolves don't merely communicate, they carry the accumulated wisdom of generations, memories of the land before human development, knowledge of balance and survival that humanity desperately needs, but has forgotten how to hear. He rose, retrieving an ancient leather-bound book from a nearby shelf. Tonight I will perform the first recognition ceremony. It will help you understand what you're experiencing and provide some protection as your abilities develop. His expression grew serious. But first, you must understand the responsibility. Others will sense your awakening. Some will seek to exploit it, to twist the connection toward control rather than harmony. What others? Ethan asked. Samuel exchanged a knowing look with Jacob. The same interests that pursued Thomas Reed. Those who see the natural world as a resource to be exploited rather than a wisdom to be heeded. He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. You've been chosen for this path, young one. The question now is whether you will accept it. The medicine bundle seemed to pulse with subtle energy as Ethan's fingers closed around it. Outside, from the edge of the forest surrounding the clearing, came the distant sound of a wolf's call, a single clear note hanging in the winter air like a question awaiting answer. The recognition ceremony had lasted well into the night, firelight casting long shadows as Samuel led Ethan through ancient rituals. Words in a language Ethan didn't recognize but somehow understood. Smoke from sacred herbs that sharpened his senses rather than dulled them. By morning, something fundamental had shifted in Ethan's perception of the world around him. It will take time to develop full control, Samuel had explained. Start small. Listen before you try to speak. Now, 3 days later, Ethan sat cross-legged in the clearing before the hidden cabin, the stone amulet warm against his chest. The wolf cubs tumbled nearby, their mother watching attentively from the cabin's threshold. Following Samuel's instructions, Ethan closed his eyes, focusing on his breathing, while keeping his mind open to impressions from the surrounding forest. At first, it was overwhelming, a cacophony of sensory input too chaotic to interpret. Gradually, he learned to filter, to focus on one source at a time. The cubs were easiest. Their emotions broadcasted with the unfiltered intensity of youth, playfulness, curiosity, occasional flashes of hunger or fatigue. Their mother was more complex. Her thoughts came not as words, but as layered impressions, memories, sensory experiences, and intentions woven together in patterns Ethan was only beginning to recognize. When he opened himself to her completely, he glimpsed fragments of her life, winters hunting in deep snow, the birth of cubs in a warm den, encounters with humans both threatening and benign. Most surprising was her clear recognition of him, not merely as the boy who saved her cubs, but as someone connected to this place, this cabin, through ties that predated his arrival. Through her eyes, Ethan saw himself as part of a continuum, the latest in a line of humans who could bridge the divide between species. Ethan began documenting his experiences in a journal, following the methodical approach he'd seen in Thomas Reed's notes. He recorded subtleties of communication, the differences between species, the way his perceptions shifted depending on time of day and weather conditions. The wolf pack gradually accepted his presence, first the cubs, then younger adults, finally the more cautious senior members. They revealed their hunting grounds, their drinking spots, the boundaries they maintained with neighboring packs. Through them, Ethan mapped the forest more accurately than any survey team could hope to achieve. His experiments expanded cautiously. A fox family denning beneath fallen logs acknowledged him with wary respect. Squirrels, initially dismissive, eventually included him in their elaborate warning system against aerial predators. Even birds began to respond, though their quick, bright consciousness moved at a pace that made sustained communication challenging. One afternoon, as spring's first tentative warmth softened the winter landscape, Ethan's explorations were interrupted by a commotion deeper in the forest. Through his connection with local wildlife, he sensed distress, a wounded predator, dangerous in its pain. Following the impressions, he found a massive black bear, limping and agitated, a deep gash in its hind leg, likely caused by an illegal trap. The situation was precarious. The bear's pain broadcasted like a beacon, its confusion and anger threatening to override rational behavior. Drawing on techniques Samuel had taught him, Ethan projected calm, non-threatening intentions while maintaining a safe distance. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said aloud. The words less important than the emotional content he projected alongside them. "I can help." The bear's attention fixed on him, massive head swinging in his direction. For a tense moment, Ethan feared he'd overestimated his abilities. Then improbably the animal lowered itself to the ground, maintaining eye contact while its aggressive posture gradually relaxed. Working methodically, projecting reassurance with each movement, Ethan approached close enough to examine the wound. The trap had been removed, but infection threatened. Using herbs from the medicine bundle, he created a poultice that would discourage further infection. As he worked, Ethan became aware of something shifting in his perception of the bear. Not just its immediate sensations, but deeper impressions. Seasonal migrations following ancient routes, hibernation dens used by generations, salmon runs now gone from valleys changed by human development. The bear carried ecological memory, knowledge of landscape transformations spanning decades. Back at the cabin, Ethan searched through Thomas Reed's collection until he found a hand-carved reed flute decorated with animal symbols. Reed's journal mentioned it specifically. The tonal qualities seemed to facilitate deeper communication pathways when played at specific frequencies. That evening, sitting before the cabin with the Wolf family lounging nearby, Ethan experimented with the flute. Certain notes created resonance with the amulet, amplifying his perceptive abilities dramatically. The Wolf's thoughts came through with new clarity. And beyond her, like radio stations finally tuned properly, impressions from dozens of forest creatures. As darkness settled over the clearing, Ethan played a simple, repeating melody. The mother wolf raised her head, amber eyes reflecting starlight. In that moment of perfect connection, Ethan heard her voice, not in his ears, but in his mind. Not human language, but clear meaning nonetheless. "The forest remembers you, Memory Keeper. It has waited for your return." Startled, Ethan lowered the flute. "Who do you think I am?" She didn't answer directly, but through their connection came a strong impression of Thomas Reed, then the boy in the photograph, then Ethan himself. 3 distinct individuals, yet somehow a single presence in the wolf's understanding of continuity. That night, Ethan dreamed of running through the forest on 4 legs, experiencing the world through senses both familiar and alien, carrying memories that spanned generations. He awoke at dawn with the certainty that the boundary between himself and the wilderness was becoming increasingly permeable, a transformation both exhilarating and terrifying in its implications. As weeks passed, Ethan divided his time between school, his grandfather's cabin, and the hidden research station in the forest. With Jacob's reluctant permission and Samuel's guidance, he'd established a routine that balanced his normal life with his increasingly extraordinary experiences. "The cabin needs protection," Samuel had advised during one of their regular mentoring sessions. "Others have sought its secrets before. They will again." Following this counsel, Ethan salvaged several trail cameras from Thomas Reed's equipment, repairing them with parts ordered online and positioning them strategically around the clearing. The cameras would activate with any significant movement, capturing images that downloaded to a tablet Ethan had installed in a waterproof case beneath the cabin's floorboards. On a bright spring afternoon, Ethan arrived at the cabin to find the wolf pack unusually agitated. The mother wolf paced the perimeter of the clearing, her unease broadcasting clearly to Ethan's enhanced senses. "Strangers," came her warning, more impression than word. "Two-legged, not like you." "When?" Ethan asked aloud, having learned that vocalization helped focus his projective thoughts. Images flowed from her. Sunrise, shadows long across the clearing, unfamiliar scents. This morning, while Ethan had been at school, immediately he checked the trail cameras, downloading the captured footage. The images confirmed his fears. 3 individuals in outdoor gear, but with an unmistakably professional bearing, had systematically searched the clearing. Their movements were purposeful, methodical, not the random wandering of hikers who'd stumbled upon the cabin by accident. Most concerning were the images showing one man examining the cabin's lock, another taking photographs of the exterior, and the third consulting what appeared to be survey equipment. They'd spent nearly an hour investigating before departing in the direction of the main road. Ethan reviewed Reed's research materials, noting with alarm that several journals had been moved from their original positions. The hidden compartments remained undiscovered, but the visitors had clearly been interested in the cabin's contents. More troubling still was the final camera image. One man looking directly at the hidden camera, raising a handheld device toward it before the feed had temporarily scrambled. The wolf arrived at his side, her body tense with protective instinct. Hide important things, her thoughts impressed upon him. They will return. Trusting her instincts, Ethan gathered the most significant journals, the artifacts with indigenous markings, and Reed's most detailed maps. He secured them in the hidden compartment behind the fireplace stones, then gathered his own notebooks and electronics. He had barely finished when distant engine sounds reached him, vehicles approaching on the rarely used fire road that came within a half-mile of the clearing. The wolf's hackles raised, her cubs retreating to the safety of the cabin's shadowed interior. "Go," she urged. "Watch from high place." Following her guidance, Ethan slipped into the woods, climbing a sturdy pine that offered concealment while overlooking the approach to the clearing. Through his connection with nearby wildlife, he sensed the forest's reaction to the intruders, birds falling silent, small mammals retreating to burrows, a general withdrawal of presence that left an eerie stillness in their wake. 4 people emerged from the tree line, the 3 men from the morning's footage, now accompanied by a woman whose tailored outdoor clothing couldn't disguise her executive bearing. She surveyed the cabin and clearing with clinical assessment, occasionally making notes on a tablet. "This is definitely Reed's research station," she stated, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet forest. "The coordinates match our records." One of the men approached with a folder. "According to the land survey, Dr. Marlowe, this entire section falls within the acquisition boundary. The cabin itself wasn't included in official records." The woman, Dr. Marlowe, nodded. "Not surprising. Reed was paranoid about corporate interference. He wouldn't have registered the structure." She examined the padlocked door. "Get this open. I want a complete inventory of anything left inside." As one man worked on the lock, another circled the cabin perimeter. "There's evidence of recent activity. Someone's been maintaining the place." Dr. Marlowe's expression sharpened. "Local kids. More systematic than vandalism or partying. Looks like someone's been using it regularly, organized, purposeful." The lock finally yielded to their tools. Dr. Marlowe entered first, emerging minutes later with clear disappointment. "Someone's removed the primary research materials." They knew exactly what they were looking for. She gestured to her team. "Full documentation of whatever's left. Check for hidden storage." Reed was clever about concealment. From his hiding place, Ethan felt a surge of protective anger. These people had no right to Thomas Reed's work, or this place that had become so important to him. The wolf below sensed his emotion, looking up at his position with steady amber eyes. Through their connection came not alarm, but strategic patience, the hunter's wisdom of choosing the right moment to act. The intruder's systematic search was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of a familiar pickup truck. Jacob stepped into the clearing, his weathered face impassive, but his posture unmistakably confrontational. "You're trespassing on protected land," he called out, voice carrying the authority of someone who knew exactly his rights and boundaries. "This property falls under conservation easement and indigenous heritage protection." Dr. Marlowe turned slowly, assessing the newcomer with cold calculation. "Actually, we have documentation indicating this parcel is scheduled for assessment under the new regional development plan." She offered an insincere smile. "And you are?" "Jacob Blackwood, the legal custodian of this land under the Wilderness Trust Agreement of 1992. He pulled folded papers from his jacket. "I've got the documentation right here, along with contact information for both the Environmental Protection Agency and the tribal legal team." The standoff vibrated with tension, but Ethan could see the uncertainty in the corporate team's body language. They hadn't expected organized resistance. "We'll continue this discussion through proper channels," Dr. Marlowe finally stated, signaling her team to withdraw. Her gaze swept the clearing once more, lingering briefly on the tree where Ethan hid. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Blackwood." Only after the sound of their vehicles faded did Ethan descend, his heart pounding with questions, and the growing certainty that his discovery of the cabin had awakened forces beyond his understanding. "They'll be back," Jacob stated flatly as they drove home. "Marlowe represents North Vale Development. They've been trying to get access to these forests for years. Timber rights, mineral exploration, luxury developments. They want it all. How do you know them?" Ethan asked, still processing the confrontation. "They approached me last year about selling my property. When I refused, they started buying surrounding parcels." Jacob's weathered hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Thomas Reed warned me about corporate interests in his research decades ago. That's why he disappeared, to protect what he'd discovered. That evening after his grandfather had fallen asleep, Ethan felt a familiar presence at the edge of his consciousness, the Silver Wolf, calling to him from beyond the physical range of normal perception. The connection they shared transcended distance, come important gathering. Slipping out of the house, Ethan followed the mental beacon through moonlit forest paths. The wolf waited at the tree line, her form silvered by moonlight. Without words, she led him deeper into the forest than he'd yet ventured, ascending ridges and crossing small streams until they reached a high meadow ringed by ancient pines. At the meadow's center lay a perfect circle of white stones, their placement too uniform to be natural. As Ethan approached, he became aware they weren't alone. From the shadows emerged the rest of the wolf pack, arranging themselves in a semicircle facing the stone ring. More surprising were the other creatures gathering at the meadow's edge, a family of foxes, several rabbits maintaining nervous distance, a magnificent buck deer with impressive antlers, even a bear that Ethan recognized as the one he had treated. The mother wolf guided Ethan to the circle's center before taking her place among her pack. Using the techniques Samuel had taught him, Ethan opened his perception fully, allowing the consciousness of the gathered creatures to flow into his awareness. What followed transcended anything he'd yet experienced, not merely impressions or simple thoughts, but a complex exchange of information and concerns from multiple species simultaneously. The amulet at his chest grew warm, somehow translating or amplifying this council of minds. The wolves shared knowledge of encroaching human activity along the eastern forest boundary. Machinery, excavation, disrupted hunting routes. The deer spoke of contaminated water sources downstream from new construction. The bear communicated disturbing sensations when approaching certain newly installed equipment, pain in ears, disorientation, forced retreat. Most unsettling were shared memories of similar incursions in seasons past. Knowledge carried through generational memory by species that had witnessed decades of incremental human expansion. They showed Ethan places once wild, now transformed, meadows beneath parking lots, streams now culverted beneath roads, ancient migration routes severed by highways. The communication wasn't just complaint, but consultation. These creatures recognized Ethan as something his human arrogance had never considered. Not an interloper in their world, but a participant in a dialogue that had existed long before modern civilization. They weren't merely tolerating his presence. They were actively incorporating him into an existing decision-making network. Through the wolf's memories, Ethan glimpsed Thomas Reed sitting in this same circle decades earlier, receiving similar counsel. The parallel sent chills through him. He wasn't discovering something new, but reclaiming a forgotten human birthright of ecological participation. The silver wolf approached the circle's center, looking directly into Ethan's eyes. Through their connection came understanding of his role, not leader or controller, but translator and representative. The ancient term memory keeper took on deeper significance. He was to maintain not just human knowledge of the forest, but the forest's knowledge itself, preserving ecological memory that transcended individual lifespans. The wolf shared specific locations Ethan needed to see: hidden springs feeding the regional watershed, caves containing mineral deposits corporations sought, sections of forest where particularly vulnerable species nursed their young. This wasn't merely information. It was strategic knowledge vital to the ecosystem's defense. Most surprising was the revelation of the wolves' sophisticated social hierarchy and decision-making process. They didn't operate by simple dominance, but through complex consensus building, with elders given respect but innovative solutions from younger pack members equally considered. Their governance structure rivaled human democratic systems in sophistication, though operating on entirely different principles. As moonlight shifted across the stone circle, the council's focus turned to Ethan himself. The assembled creatures evaluated him, his intentions, capabilities, trustworthiness. Through their collective perception, Ethan saw himself from outside, his human limitations starkly apparent, but also his unique capacity to bridge worlds. The question hung unspoken in the night air. Would he accept the responsibility that Thomas Reed had once carried? Would he stand as memory keeper against forces that threatened this ancient balance? Ethan stood in the stone circle, overwhelmed by all he'd witnessed, yet feeling a profound rightness in this impossible communion. "I'll help however I can," he said aloud, the words unnecessary but the declaration itself significant. The silver wolf approached, touching her nose to the amulet at his chest. Through their connection came her acknowledgement, not gratitude, but recognition of a covenant renewed. The gathered animals dispersed silently into the night forest, leaving Ethan alone with the mother wolf in the moonlit clearing, forever changed by the council of minds that had welcomed him into their ancient fellowship. The morning after the forest council, Ethan found his grandfather sitting on the porch, watching dawn light filter through the pines. Something in Jacob's posture suggested he'd been waiting, perhaps even knowing where Ethan had been. "You went to the stone circle last night," Jacob said. Not a question. Ethan nodded, taking a seat beside him. "How did you know?" "Your grandmother always said the wolves would call when it was time." Jacob stared into the distance. "Sarah, your mother, was called there once too when she was about your age." "My mother? But you said she left all this behind." Jacob sighed deeply, his weathered hands clasped between his knees. "I've kept things from you, Ethan, things I thought I was protecting you from." He turned, meeting Ethan's gaze directly. "It's time you knew the full truth about Thomas Reed. He was the researcher studying wolf communication, the one who built the cabin." "He was more than that." Jacob paused, choosing his words carefully. "Thomas Reed was your grandfather, your mother's father." The revelation struck Ethan with physical force, pieces suddenly realigning in his mind. His mother's reluctance to discuss her childhood, the familiar features in the cabin photographs, his own inexplicable connection to this place. "That would make you, your maternal grandfather died before you were born." "I'm your father's father," Jacob explained. "Your parents met in college. Sarah studying wildlife biology like her father, your dad in environmental law. They fell in love over shared ideals. What happened to Thomas Reed? Why did he disappear?" Jacob's expression darkened. His research attracted the wrong kind of attention. Reed discovered that wolves maintain a complex communication network spanning generations, ecological knowledge preserved and transmitted through bloodlines. More importantly, he found evidence of human potential to access this network, abilities long dismissed as indigenous superstition. "The memory keepers," Ethan whispered. Yes. When corporations realize the potential applications, military communication, intelligence gathering, even mind-influencing technology, they tried to seize control of his work. Reed refused to weaponize what he'd discovered, so he disappeared with his most important findings. Your mother was just 16, and my mother, did she have these abilities too? She did. Sarah had the gift, stronger even than her father's. But after Reed vanished, she saw what pursuing these abilities had cost him. She chose a different path: conventional science, urban life, distance from the wilderness that called to her. Jacob's eyes grew distant. She purposely raised you in the city, away from these forests, hoping the gift would fade without exposure to trigger it. Then why bring me here after the accident? Why now? I didn't have a choice. Your mother's will specifically named me as your guardian. I think she knew somehow that despite her precautions, your heritage would eventually express itself. Better under guidance than alone. He reached into his shirt, pulling out an old silver locket on a chain. I should have given you this sooner. Inside the locket were tiny photographs, one of a young woman Ethan recognized as his mother, the other of Thomas Reed, standing in front of the forest cabin. The family resemblance between Reed and Ethan was undeniable. The day your parents died, Sarah called me. She said she'd been having dreams of wolves again, that she felt the forest reaching for her after all those years of silence. She was finally considering bringing you here to introduce you to your heritage. Jacob's voice caught. The car accident happened that same evening. It wasn't just a coincidence that the wolf led me to the cabin, Ethan realized. The silver female? Jacob asked. When Ethan nodded, he continued, Reed called her Aurora. If it's the same wolf, she'd be very old now. More likely a descendant who inherited the connection. He hesitated before adding, wolves recognize bloodlines, both their own and others. She knew exactly who you were. Through his enhanced perception, Ethan sensed the wolf's presence in the nearby forest, listening through his ears. Through their connection came confirmation. She had indeed recognized him as Reed's descendant, sensed the dormant abilities only awaiting awakening. There's more, Jacob continued reluctantly. Reed's disappearance wasn't just about protecting his research. Northvale was a smaller company then, but already ruthless. Their representatives threatened your mother to force Reed's cooperation. When that failed, there was an incident. Reed defended her. A man was injured. That's when he knew he had to vanish completely. And now they're back, Ethan said. The same company, different people, same interests. Dr. Marlowe has been researching historical land records, asking questions about the old research station. I think they found some of Reed's early publications, enough to realize his later work might have commercial value. The wolf's thoughts pressed into Ethan's mind. Danger returning. Metal things in Forest Edge. Wrong sounds spreading. Jacob watched Ethan's expression change as he received the communication. You can hear her right now, can't you? Just like Reed could. Just like your mother. She says they're already moving into the forest. Installing equipment. Then we don't have much time. Jacob stood, decision made. We need to see Samuel. If you're committed to this path, to being a memory keeper like your grandfather before you, you'll need to understand exactly what you're defending and how to protect it. As they prepared to leave, Ethan felt the weight of his newly discovered legacy settling around him. Not just genetic heritage, but a responsibility passed through blood and choice alike. Thomas Reed hadn't merely been a researcher. He had been a guardian of ancient knowledge. A role now calling to Ethan through the whispers of wolves and the memories of the forest itself. Samuel Blackfeather listened intently as Jacob and Ethan related the confrontation. With Dr. Marlowe and the revelations about Ethan's ancestry, his expression remained calm, though his eyes reflected deep concern. The timing is no accident, Samuel said when they finished. The corporations have been pushing for development access to the northern forests for years. Now suddenly they're specifically interested in Reed's old research station. He turned to Ethan. What exactly did the wolf show you at the council gathering? Locations throughout the forest, springs, caves, specific trees. And she showed me images of Thomas Reed like memories. Samuel nodded thoughtfully. Aurora is showing you what you need to protect. But there's more to Reed's legacy than what remains in the cabin. He studied Ethan carefully. He created a contingency plan in case his work was ever threatened. Aurora knows where. 2 days later, Ethan followed the silver wolf along a narrow game trail that wound deeper into the forest than he'd yet ventured. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, with rocky outcroppings and densely packed pines that blocked much of the morning light. Eventually, they reached a fast-flowing stream cutting through a limestone ravine. Aurora paused at the water's edge, looking meaningfully at Ethan, then at the stream. Following her gaze, he noticed an unusual pattern in the current, a swirling eddy where water disappeared beneath an overhanging rock face. Below and behind came Aurora's impression. Taking a deep breath, Ethan waded into the frigid water. The stream reached his waist at its deepest point as he maneuvered toward the rock overhang. Bending down to peer beneath the surface, he discovered what the churning water concealed, a narrow opening, just large enough for a person to slip through if they submerged completely. Aurora watched from the bank, her mental encouragement steady. Air inside, safe passage. Filling his lungs with a deep breath, Ethan ducked beneath the overhang and pushed through the underwater opening. For several terrifying seconds, he moved blindly through the constricted passage before emerging into darkness on the other side. His feet found solid ground as he surfaced, gasping for air in what felt like an enclosed space. Fumbling in his waterproof pack, Ethan retrieved a flashlight. The beam revealed a remarkable sight. A small but dry cave chamber, its walls bearing faded pigment markings similar to those in the stone circle. More surprising was the evidence of human habitation. A metal storage cabinet, a waterproof tent shelter, battery-powered equipment carefully preserved from moisture. This was no temporary hiding place, but a meticulously prepared fallback position, Thomas Reed's emergency research bunker. Ethan examined the equipment, finding environmental monitors, recording devices far more sophisticated than those in the cabin, and a locked metal case securely bolted to the cave floor. The case had both a key lock and a combination dial. After several failed attempts, Ethan tried the date from the photograph in the locket, his mother's birthday. The lock clicked open. Inside lay Reed's most sensitive research, journals, data recordings, and detailed documentation of his communication methods. Unlike the theoretical notes at the cabin, these materials contained comprehensive, practical instructions for developing and enhancing cross-species communication abilities. One journal documented Reed's growing alarm about corporate interest in his work. North Vale representatives approached again today. Their questions have shifted from ecological applications to military potential. They specifically asked about range limitations and command implementation, weaponizing what should be communion. I've removed critical research components to this location. If necessary, I'm prepared to destroy rather than surrender this. Knowledge. Another notebook contained damning evidence, photographs, and water. Sample analyses showing illegal toxic dumping in watershed areas controlled by North Vale subsidiaries, alongside maps of underground aquifers demonstrating how contamination would eventually reach protected wilderness. Reed had been building an environmental case against the corporation while simultaneously researching wolf communication. Most valuable was a waterproof case containing technical data on frequency ranges that disrupted animal communication networks. The same technology Ethan suspected North Vale was now deploying around the forest perimeter. Reed had documented countermeasures, methods to shield against disruption or even reverse engineer the technology to protect rather than interfere. A final journal entry, dated just weeks before Reed's disappearance, read, "If you're reading this, you've been led here by Aurora or her descendants. The gift runs in our bloodline, but it requires choice and commitment. The knowledge contained here isn't meant to elevate humans above nature, but to restore our forgotten place within it. The wolves have protected these secrets across generations. Now we must do the same. Accompanying this entry was a detailed methodology for expanding communication abilities, exercises, focusing techniques, and ceremonial practices, combining Reed's scientific approach with indigenous wisdom, learned from Samuel's predecessors. As Ethan sorted through these materials, a particular notebook caught his attention. It contained entries addressed directly to Sarah, Reed's contingency instructions should anything happen to him. The final pages included information clearly intended for a future memory keeper, though Reed couldn't have known it would be his own grandson. The communication network extends further than I first believed, one passage explained. The wolves aren't merely individual communicators, but nodes in a living system spanning the entire ecosystem. What Northvale seeks is access to this network. Imagine military applications of mind-to-mind communication, surveillance through animal perception, intelligence gathering beyond any conventional means. What they don't understand is that this connection requires balance, reciprocity. It cannot be extracted or weaponized without destroying its essential nature. Ethan packed the most critical materials into his waterproof bag, knowing he couldn't carry everything in one trip. He would need to return with proper storage equipment, possibly with Samuel's help. What mattered now was securing Reed's core research and evidence against Northvale, completing the work his grandfather had begun decades earlier. Emerging from the hidden cave into afternoon sunlight, Ethan found Aurora waiting patiently. Through their connection, he shared his discovery and determination. Her response came with the clarity of direct communication they now shared. The memory keeper returns. The forest remembers its voice. Morning dew still clung to the grass when 3 black SUVs rolled up the long driveway to Jacob's cabin. Ethan watched from the kitchen window as Dr. Marlowe emerged from the lead vehicle, accompanied by 2 men in business attire and 4 others wearing the uniforms of private security. Right on schedule, Jacob muttered, setting down his coffee cup. Samuel said they'd be back with legal paperwork within the week. The confrontation played out on the front porch, voices carrying clearly through the partially opened window. Dr. Marlowe presented documents with professional courtesy that didn't reach her eyes. These court orders grant Northvale Development access to survey lands specified in the Regional Development Plan, she explained, handing Jacob a thick envelope, including the abandoned research structure approximately 3 miles northeast of this location. Jacob examined the paperwork with deliberate slowness. These orders cover preliminary environmental assessment only. They don't grant excavation rights or property access beyond non-invasive surveying. Of course, Dr. Marlowe agreed smoothly. We're simply documenting existing conditions before formal proposals are submitted. Standard procedure. And the armed security detail? Is that standard procedure too? Merely precautionary. These forests can be dangerous. Her smile remained fixed. We understand Thomas Reed conducted wildlife research in this region. As part of our environmental impact assessment, we'd be very interested in reviewing his findings. Reed's work was his own private intellectual property, Jacob countered. Never affiliated with any corporation or institution. Actually, our records indicate Reed received grant funding from a Northvale subsidiary in 1973. Under the terms of that agreement, all research findings technically belong to the parent company. She paused, her tone sharpening. We know someone has been accessing his old research station. We're simply reclaiming company property. From his vantage point, Ethan could sense her deception, not through any supernatural ability, but from the careful omissions in her phrasing. The alleged funding relationship was likely a convenient legal fiction, created to establish retroactive claim to Reed's work. After they departed, Ethan and Jacob watched through binoculars as teams of surveyors entered the forest, establishing base camps and equipment stations along the boundaries of what would become, according to their permits, a limited development recreational area. In the days that followed, Ethan divided his time between school, helping Samuel transfer Reed's hidden archive materials to a secure location on reservation land, and monitoring Northvale's activities through his unique network of forest allies. The wolves became his scouts, observing survey teams from concealment and sharing what they witnessed through their mental connection. Squirrels reported on equipment installations in the canopy. Even birds contributed, providing aerial perspectives of the expanding corporate presence. What they revealed was disturbing. Beyond the visible surveying activity, Northvale teams were installing small, unobtrusive devices at strategic points throughout the forest. Cylindrical units mounted on trees, solar-powered and emitting frequencies just beyond human hearing range. Disruption technology, Samuel confirmed when Ethan described the devices. Based on Reed's research, but inverted. Instead of enhancing animal communication, they're designed to scatter it, create confusion, and drive wildlife from specific areas. One afternoon, returning from the underwater cave with the last of Reed's archive materials, Ethan discovered fresh boot prints approaching the hidden cabin. Inside, he found evidence of a more thorough search. Floorboards pried up, wall panels removed, every potential hiding spot examined. Most concerning was the discovery that someone had located and accessed one of his trail cameras. The memory card was missing, potentially providing Northvale with images of Ethan's activities and, worse, his interactions with the wolves. That evening, as Ethan and Jacob returned home, they found their own cabin had been searched as well. Though professionally done with minimal disturbance, Ethan's room showed subtle signs of intrusion. Desk drawers slightly misaligned, his computer position shifted. His personal journal moved from its hiding spot beneath the mattress. "They're escalating," Jacob observed grimly. "Time to relocate temporarily." Samuel welcomed them to his compound on reservation land, where legal jurisdictions provided additional protection against corporate intrusion. From this safer location, Ethan continued monitoring forest developments through his animal network, documenting Northvale's expanding presence for the environmental lawyers Jacob had contacted. The wolves reported increasingly strange effects from the installed devices: disorientation when passing nearby, confusion in pack communication, difficulty coordinating hunts. Other species showed similar impacts, their collective intelligence fragmented by the invisible technological interference. During a supply run back to Jacob's cabin, Ethan encountered one of Northvale's security teams on the main road. Their leader, a former military man with cold, assessing eyes, videotaped Ethan openly as he passed. That night, reviewing the day's events with Jacob and Samuel, a notification pinged on Ethan's tablet. One of his remaining hidden cameras had activated. The footage showed Dr. Marlowe herself examining the abandoned cabin, speaking into a recorder as she methodically documented the space. "Subject appears to be using the structure regularly." Her voice came clearly through the tablet's speaker. "Evidence suggests interaction with local wildlife, consistent with Reed's theoretical frameworks. Request permission to deploy monitoring package Alpha and begin direct observation protocols." As she turned to leave, something caught her attention. A small object glinting on the floor near the hearth. The camera angle couldn't clearly show what she'd found, but her expression of triumph was unmistakable as she carefully bagged the item and spoke again into her recorder. Confirmation of subject capabilities. Initiating Phase 2 surveillance. After the footage ended, Samuel looked gravely at Ethan. "What did you leave behind?" Ethan mentally inventoried the cabin's contents, cold realization dawning. One of the wolf cubs was playing with a small metal whistle, part of Reed's communication tools. "It must have rolled under the hearth. If they've identified you as a potential memory keeper, they'll move quickly," Samuel warned. Northvale didn't just want Reed's research. They wanted someone with the innate ability to implement it. "Someone like you?" As if confirming his words, Ethan's phone chimed with an incoming email from an unfamiliar address. The message contained no text, just an attachment, a single photograph taken from one of his stolen trail cameras, clearly showing Ethan sitting in the forest clearing surrounded by wolves that showed no fear of his presence. The implied message was clear. We know exactly what you are. It's time to confirm your role formally, Samuel announced 3 days after their retreat to the reservation. If you're truly to stand as a memory keeper against what's coming, you need the recognition and protection of the traditional council. Ethan sat cross-legged beside the central fire pit as Samuel explained what would happen. The confirmation ritual dated back centuries, series of challenges designed to test a potential memory, keeper's abilities and commitment before formal acknowledgement by tribal elders. This isn't just ceremony, Samuel emphasized. The trials assess whether your connection is strong enough to withstand what Northvale will bring against you. Many are called to this path. Few can bear its full weight. As dusk approached, vehicles arrived carrying elders from several regional tribes. Ethan recognized some from previous visits to Samuel's compound, dignified men and women who moved with the quiet confidence of those secure in their traditions yet fully engaged with the modern world. Many were professionals, lawyers, doctors, teachers who balanced contemporary lives with traditional responsibilities. Don't be misled by appearances, Samuel advised, noting Ethan's surprise at the elders' business casual attire. These are some of the most knowledgeable traditional practitioners in the region. They understand what's at stake with Northvale's incursion better than most environmental scientists. The ceremony began with ritual, purification, sage smoke washing over Ethan as Samuel recited words in their native language. The elders formed a circle with Ethan at its center, beside a small table bearing objects covered by a woven blanket. The first trial tests your receptive abilities, Samuel explained, removing the blanket to reveal an array of small items, feathers, stones, carved figures, plant specimens. Each holds significance within our traditions. You will be blindfolded, and the spirits of these objects will speak to you if your mind is properly attuned. Blindfolded, Ethan focused on opening his perceptions as he had learned to do with the wolves. Samuel placed objects in his hands one by one. With each, Ethan described impressions that came to him. A feather that carried sensations of high soaring and sharp vision. A stone that held memories of ancient riverbed formations. A carved figure that resonated with ceremonial drumming and firelight. The elders murmured approval at his accuracy, though Ethan himself couldn't know how correct his perceptions were. The second trial tests your projective abilities, Samuel continued, removing the blindfold. You must communicate your intentions to creatures who cannot hear human speech. 2 tribal members brought forward small wooden cages containing a nervous rabbit, a suspicious raven, and a small garter snake. Each cage was opened in turn, the animals free to flee, but remaining within the ceremonial circle. Drawing on his practice with the wolf pack, Ethan focused on projecting calming intentions toward each creature. The rabbit's frantic movements gradually stilled. The raven, initially hostile, tilted its head in curiosity before hopping closer. Most impressive to the watching elders, the snake coiled comfortably on Ethan's outstretched palm, its tongue flicking without fear. The third trial tests your navigation abilities, Samuel explained, after the animals had been respectfully released. Memory keepers must find their way through both physical and spiritual landscapes. This challenge proved the most difficult. Blindfolded again, Ethan was led into the surrounding forest and left alone. His task: locate specific objects hidden throughout the woods using only the guidance of local wildlife. For nearly 2 hours, he navigated by impression and instinct, gathering tokens from beneath rocks and hollow trees, following the mental signatures of squirrels and birds who responded to his silent requests for assistance. When he finally returned to the circle, muddy but successful, the elders nodded with increased respect. The final trial tests your access to ancestral memory, Samuel said, producing a clear crystal prism from a beaded pouch. This has been used by memory keepers for generations. In moonlight, it can reveal imprints of what has come before. As full darkness fell, the prism was positioned to capture moonlight, projecting a spectrum across a stretched white deerskin. Ethan focused his perception on the dancing colors, entering a meditative state as Samuel's soft drumming guided him deeper. The colors began to shift, forming images that only Ethan could see, forest scenes from decades past. Wolves running through pristine valleys now developed, indigenous gatherings at the stone circle. And finally, Thomas Reed sitting in this very location, undergoing the same ritual decades earlier. Most powerfully, Ethan witnessed his grandfather's final days, Reed's realization that North Vale was closing in, his decision to disperse his research to protect it, his final communion with a younger Aurora before disappearing into the wilderness with only essential supplies and his most critical findings. When Ethan finally emerged from the vision state, tears streaked his face. "I saw him, Thomas Reed. I saw what he sacrificed to protect this knowledge." Samuel placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "And now you understand what you may be called to sacrifice as well." The elders conferred briefly before the eldest woman stepped forward, her silver hair gleaming in the firelight. The council recognizes Ethan Blackwood as memory keeper in the tradition of Thomas Reed. May the wisdom of the forest flow through him in the coming struggle. Samuel presented Ethan with a small leather pouch containing traditional herbs and symbolic objects, tools to strengthen your abilities and protect against those who would misuse them. The path ahead won't be easy. North Vale has resources and technologies we can only counter with deeper connection and wisdom. As the ceremony concluded, Ethan felt a familiar presence at the edge of the firelight. Aurora watched from the shadows, her amber eyes reflecting flames. Through their connection, he sensed her approval and something more, a memory of her as a young wolf, present at Reed's own confirmation. The continuity of guardian and keeper spanning human and wolf generations alike. The tribal council formally pledged support for the legal and physical protection of the contested forest lands, their commitment strengthened by Ethan's confirmation. What had begun as one boy's chance encounter with freezing, wolf cubs had evolved into a renewal of ancient covenant, human and wilderness, standing together against forces that would sever their shared bond. Forever, the morning light revealed what night had concealed. North Vale's operations had expanded dramatically overnight. Heavy equipment rumbled along newly graded access roads at the forest's eastern boundary. Surveyors in bright vests moved methodically through the underbrush, marking trees and setting stakes topped with fluttering orange ribbons. From his vantage point on a rocky outcrop, Ethan observed with mounting concern. Beside him, Jacob studied the activity through binoculars, his expression grim. "They're moving faster than their permits allow," Jacob noted. Environmental assessment isn't supposed to include clearing operations. Through Ethan's enhanced perception, the forest's distress broadcast like static, confused animal movements, disrupted patterns, the jarring discord of machinery against natural rhythms. Most concerning were reports from the wolf pack about strange devices being installed throughout the zone, similar to those documented in Reed's notes, but more advanced. "The animals say the new equipment hurts them," Ethan explained. "Not physically, but it scrambles their ability to communicate. The wolves can't coordinate hunting. Birds lose their flocking patterns. It's like static drowning out their natural network." Jacob lowered the binoculars. "We need to coordinate our own response. Samuel's working with the tribal legal team, but we need documentation of what's happening on the ground." Ethan's role became that of intelligence gatherer. Using his connection with the forest creatures, he established a sophisticated monitoring network. Wolves patrolled perimeters, reporting worker movements and equipment locations. Squirrels and birds became his eyes in areas too dangerous for direct observation. Even burrowing animals provided valuable information about soil disruption and water table changes. Each evening, Ethan synthesized these reports into detailed maps, marking North Vale's expanding presence and the location of communication-disrupting devices. The pattern became clear. They were systematically isolating sections of forest, breaking the natural communication networks by creating dead zones, where animals became disoriented and confused. Meanwhile, Jacob activated his own network of environmental activists and legal experts. A team of environmental lawyers filed emergency injunctions, citing violations of existing permits. Wildlife biologists documented irregular animal behavior consistent with stress responses to the disruption technology. Samuel contributed crucially by providing a weather-worn map preserved by his people for generations. Its faded markings detailed ancient territorial boundaries, sacred sites, and historical usage patterns that predated modern property laws. "This map strengthens our legal position significantly," explained Maria Cortez, the lead environmental attorney. "It demonstrates continuous indigenous use and cultural significance that should trigger additional protections under federal statutes." Ethan's grandfather studied the ancient map with reverence. "My father spoke of these boundaries. The North Ridge was always considered the dividing line beyond which development would threaten the watershed. Exactly where North Vale is currently clearing," Ethan noted. Their coordinated resistance gained momentum. Independent journalists arrived to document the situation. Environmental groups organized peaceful protests at North Vale's regional headquarters. Indigenous rights organizations issued statements of support. Dr. Marlowe's response came swiftly. Additional security personnel appeared at work sites, preventing closer observation. Legal counterfilings claimed economic necessity and disputed environmental impact assessments. Most concerning, the disruption devices multiplied, their effective range expanding daily. One afternoon, while monitoring from a hidden position near the stone circle, Ethan attempted to communicate with a family of foxes that regularly provided information about the western boundary. Instead of the usual clear impressions, he encountered painful feedback, sharp, disorienting static that forced him to break the connection. Aurora appeared beside him, her own movements less coordinated than usual. Through their bond came fragmented impressions. The disruption field was strengthening, specifically targeting frequencies used by predator species. The technology had been refined, focusing on the neural pathways Ethan himself used to communicate with the forest creatures. That evening, Samuel examined Ethan after he reported headaches and difficulty maintaining animal connections. "They're adapting the technology," he concluded. Reed's journals mentioned this possibility. Disruption fields specifically calibrated to block memory keeper abilities. North Vale must have found more of his research than we realized. Jacob spread their tactical map across the table, comparing it with the ancient territorial boundaries. "They've accelerated the timeline. Environmental review should take months, but they're pushing through in weeks. Someone in the regulatory system is clearing obstacles. The corporate devices are creating gaps in our intelligence network," Ethan added. "Areas where I can't sense what's happening anymore. The animals avoid these zones entirely or become disoriented when passing through." Samuel's weathered finger traced a pattern on the map. "They're establishing a perimeter, cutting off the sacred sites from the rest of the forest. If they succeed, the land's spiritual network will be fragmented beyond recovery." "We need to counter their technology," Jacob insisted. "There must be something in Reed's research about neutralizing these disruption fields." Ethan nodded, recalling passages from the underwater cave archives. "There are notes about harmonic interference patterns. Reed was developing countermeasures, but never completed them." "Then you must finish his work," Samuel said quietly. "This was always going to be your task, Ethan. The Memory Keeper doesn't just preserve knowledge, he adapts it to meet new threats." As darkness settled over the forest, Ethan felt the weight of legacy pressing upon him. Somewhere in his grandfather's scattered research lay the key to protecting the forest's ancient communication network, and by extension, the interconnected consciousness that had evolved over countless generations. The technological storm gathering at the forest's edge threatened not just trees and wildlife, but an entire way of knowing that modern humanity had forgotten how to value. Through his connection with Aurora, increasingly strained by the disruption fields, came a single clear impression. The forest remembers, even when technology makes it forget. Find the old voice that speaks through new storms. The disruption technology's effects worsened daily. Ethan's connection with the forest creatures grew increasingly fragmented, like a phone call breaking up in areas of poor reception. Aurora still managed to communicate, but even her powerful presence came through distorted, requiring intense concentration to interpret. "We need to find something to counter these devices," Ethan told Jacob and Samuel as they reviewed their dwindling intelligence from the forest. "The animals are disoriented. Some are leaving territories their families have held for generations." Samuel nodded grimly. "The disruption is spreading faster than we anticipated. Our legal challenges won't resolve quickly enough to prevent permanent damage to the communication network." Ethan had been systematically reviewing Thomas Reed's research materials, searching for solutions. The underwater cave archive contained theoretical countermeasures, but Reed had never completed practical implementations before his disappearance. That night, as Ethan struggled to sleep, Aurora's presence touched his mind, weaker than before but unmistakable. The impression carried urgency. "Follow. Last place. Final words." Despite the late hour and increasing risk, Ethan slipped from Samuel's compound and into the darkened forest. Aurora waited at the tree line, her silver coat ghostly in the moonlight. She led him not toward the hidden cabin or underwater cave, but along a new route, deeper into the most rugged section of the contested territory. They traveled for over an hour, the wolf choosing paths that avoided Northvale's monitoring equipment. Eventually, they reached a massive lightning-struck pine, its trunk split but still living, new growth emerging from ancient wood. Aurora indicated the exposed heartwood with her nose. Ethan examined the tree carefully, running his fingers along the weather-smoothed wood. Near the base, almost invisible unless directly searched for, he discovered a small hollow containing a weatherproof case. Inside lay a voice recorder, the old cassette type, protected by careful wrapping. Back at Samuel's compound, with Jacob and Samuel looking on anxiously, Ethan connected the ancient recorder to speakers. The tape had degraded somewhat, but the voice, Thomas Reed's voice, emerged clear enough to understand. "To whoever finds this, I hope it's Sarah. But I fear circumstances may prevent her return." Static interrupted briefly. "Northvale's interest in my work has become dangerous. They've developed prototype disruptors based on my early research. If you're hearing this, they've likely deployed advanced versions." Reed's voice continued, detailing specifications for the disruption technology and, crucially, its vulnerabilities. The system targets specific neural frequency ranges used in cross-species communication. But like any wave-based technology, it can be counteracted through harmonic interference. The recording included precise instructions for creating devices that would neutralize the disruption fields, simple assemblies of natural materials combined with specific electronic components, positioned at strategic locations to create a protective network. Most importantly, Reed concluded, the countermeasures require activation by someone with the gift, a memory keeper whose mind can bridge the frequencies naturally. The technology amplifies what must already exist within the operator. As the recording ended, a different tone entered Reed's voice, more personal, less scientific. "If my daughter finds this, tell her I never blamed her for choosing a different path. The gift is as much burden as blessing." Static interrupted again. "If a new memory keeper has emerged, remember that technology is only a tool. The true power lies in the ancient connection between human consciousness and the living world, a relationship our species has forgotten but not lost." The final words came through clearly, carrying emotional weight that transcended the years. "The forest speaks with many voices. Listen for mine among them." Ethan sat in silence when the recording finished, processing not just the technical information, but the personal message from a grandfather he'd never known. Through their shared gift, Thomas Reed had reached across time to provide exactly what was needed in this moment of crisis. He knew this day would come, Samuel said quietly. Reed understood that Northvale wouldn't abandon their pursuit, even decades later. Jacob studied the technical specifications Reed had provided. These countermeasures can be built with materials we can gather locally. The electronic components are basic, nothing we can't source quickly. But they need to be placed at specific points throughout the forest, Ethan noted, including areas now heavily monitored by Northvale security. The animals will help, Samuel suggested. Even with disrupted communication, they understand the threat to their home. Working through the night, they constructed the first prototype countermeasure device following Reed's specifications, a combination of crystalline stones arranged in precise geometric patterns, conductive metals forming circuits, and simple electronic oscillators powered by small solar cells. The design ingeniously incorporated natural materials that resonated with forest energies, amplifying their effect beyond what technology alone could achieve. By dawn, Ethan tested the device in an area previously affected by disruption fields. The result was immediate and encouraging, a small radius of cleared communication space where his connection with nearby wildlife strengthened once again. "It works," he confirmed to Jacob and Samuel, "but its range is limited. We'll need dozens of these positioned throughout the forest to counter all their disruptors." "Then we build dozens," Jacob stated simply, already gathering materials for the next units. As morning light filtered through the trees, Ethan felt Reed's presence almost tangibly, not through supernatural means, but through the legacy of knowledge passed from one memory keeper to the next. The solutions they needed had been waiting, preserved by foresight and patience, for the moment when the forest would face this threat again. Aurora appeared at the edge of the clearing, watching their work with approval, evident even without the clear communication they had previously shared. Through their strained connection came a single powerful impression. The old voice speaks. The new voice answers. The forest remembers both. Deployment of Reed's countermeasures required strategic planning and precise execution. Northvale security patrols had increased, making direct access to critical areas increasingly dangerous. The solution came through Ethan's unique partnership with the forest itself. "The animals can carry the smaller units," he explained to Jacob and Samuel as they finalized construction of 24 countermeasure devices. "They know the safe routes between security patrols and can place the devices where human detection is unlikely." Each unit was carefully tuned to Reed's specifications, crystalline. Resonators harvested from specific locations Samuel identified, arranged in sacred geometric patterns that amplified their natural frequencies. The resulting technology seamlessly blended indigenous wisdom with modern electronics, creating harmony rather than opposition between the approaches. Aurora coordinated the distribution network. Despite the disruption fields, her powerful mind could still reach Ethan clearly enough to organize the resistance. Under her guidance, forest creatures became carriers of liberation technology. Squirrels transporting the smallest units to treetop positions, foxes moving medium-sized devices to hidden dens and hollows. Even the reluctant bear placing larger units in remote caves where Northvale hadn't yet established surveillance. Within 3 days, a network of countermeasures created expanding bubbles of protected communication space throughout the forest. In these zones, Ethan's connection with wildlife strengthened once again, allowing more detailed intelligence gathering on Northvale's activities. What they discovered was alarming. The corporation had accelerated their timeline dramatically, bringing in equipment for preliminary construction before environmental reviews were completed. Water testing stations were being dismantled rather than monitored. Survey markers had been moved to exclude sensitive ecological areas from protection. They're falsifying the environmental impact assessment, Jacob concluded after reviewing Ethan's reports. Manipulating data to fast-track approvals, the animals responded with increasingly coordinated resistance as the countermeasure network expanded. Under Aurora's guidance and Ethan's strategic direction, They implemented tactics that confused and delayed North Vale operations without direct confrontation. Wildlife trails suddenly shifted, leading survey teams into marshy dead ends. Essential equipment developed mysterious malfunctions. Carefully placed survey markers disappeared overnight, only to be discovered in incorrect locations days later. GPS coordinates inexplicably shifted in electronic records, creating mapping inconsistencies that required time-consuming verification. Most effective was the strategic relocation of dens and nests into areas marked for immediate development. Environmental regulations required additional review for active wildlife habitations, creating legitimate delays North Vale couldn't easily circumvent. The animals understand exactly what's happening. Ethan explained to a gathering of environmental activists who had established a monitoring camp at the forest edge. They're not just reacting instinctively, they're implementing deliberate countermeasures based on understanding human regulatory systems. Media attention grew as the unusual wildlife behavior attracted notice. Nature photographers captured unprecedented images of multiple species cooperating in ways biology textbooks declared impossible. Video footage of wolves apparently leading other animals to safety from development zones went viral online. Scientific observers noted bizarre equipment failures that occurred only when animals were present in the area. Workers began reporting unsettling experiences, feelings of being watched by intelligent presences, dreams of animals speaking warnings, inexplicable anxiety when attempting to operate machinery in certain forest sections. Several quit, citing experiences they couldn't rationally explain but found deeply disturbing. Samuel brought additional support through traditional channels. Elders from neighboring tribes arrived to conduct ceremonies at the stone circle, strengthening the spiritual protection of the forest. Their presence attracted respectful media coverage, highlighting the cultural significance of the contested lands. The tide of public opinion is shifting, Jacob noted, as they reviewed regional news coverage. North Vale's narrative about responsible development is collapsing as people witness what's really happening. Dr. Marlowe responded by escalating technological countermeasures. New disruption devices appeared, operating at different frequencies, designed to bypass Reed's protective technology. For several days, Ethan's communication network faltered again until he adapted the countermeasure designs, incorporating Reed's contingency modifications from the recovered instructions. The most significant breakthrough came when Samuel taught Ethan to use an ancient ceremonial drum carved from the heartwood of a lightning-struck oak, the same tree that had protected Reed's final message. When played at specific locations within the stone circle, the drum's vibrations somehow amplified the countermeasure network's effectiveness exponentially. The drum speaks to the oldest memories in the land, Samuel explained. It reminds the forest of agreements made before human language existed. With each rhythmic beat, Ethan could feel the forest's communication network strengthening, spreading beyond individual species to create a unified field of resistance. Animals that would normally avoid each other gathered in unprecedented assemblies, sharing territory and purpose against the common threat. North Vale's corporate headquarters issued a press release announcing a temporary pause in assessment activities due to unusual environmental conditions requiring additional study. Behind the corporate language, Ethan and his allies recognized the truth. The forest itself had risen in unified defense, demonstrating an intelligence and coordination that defied conventional explanation. That evening, as sunset painted the stone circle in amber light, Ethan sat with Aurora, watching dozens of forest creatures gather in the protected space, prey and predator, temporarily setting aside natural roles to participate in something greater. Through the restored communication network, their collective consciousness touched Ethan's mind like a vast, ancient intelligence awakening from dormancy. "We remember this alliance," came the impression, not from any single animal, but from the integrated awareness of the forest itself. Humans stood with us before. They can again. Dawn broke with the rumble of heavy machinery. Despite the legal challenges, media attention, and unexplained difficulties, North Vale had obtained emergency permits citing economic necessity and strategic resource access. A convoy of bulldozers, excavators and logging equipment rolled toward the most sensitive section of the contested forest, the watershed headwaters where ancient springs fed the entire regional ecosystem. Ethan felt the forest's alarm ripple through his consciousness as animals fled the approaching destruction. Aurora's urgent summons pulled him from sleep moments before Jacob burst into his room at Samuel's compound. "They're moving in with full equipment," his grandfather reported grimly. The injunction was overruled last night in an emergency closed session. Samuel was already organizing their response, coordinating with tribal elders, environmental activists, and the legal team. "We need to establish a physical presence immediately," he instructed. "Peaceful but unmovable resistance while the appeals court reviews the injunction." Within an hour, Ethan found himself at the front lines where Forest met Access Road. Alongside stood Jacob and Samuel, dozens of tribal members, environmental activists, and concerned local citizens. News vans lined the roadside, cameras capturing the confrontation unfolding against the backdrop of ancient pines. The machinery halted temporarily before the human barrier. Security personnel established a perimeter while Dr. Marlowe herself emerged from a corporate SUV, accompanied by what appeared to be county officials. Her confident stride faltered slightly at the size of the gathered resistance and media presence. "This is a legally permitted operation," she announced through a megaphone. "Anyone interfering with North Vale development activities will be subject to removal and potential prosecution." Samuel stepped forward, his dignity and calm presence commanding attention. "This land falls under protected status through multiple statutes, including the Indigenous Sacred Sites Preservation Act. Your permits were obtained through procedural irregularities currently under review by federal authorities. The standoff intensified as more supporters arrived, including a delegation of environmental scientists documenting sensitive ecological indicators in the contested area. Local residents who had initially supported development for economic reasons began drifting to the protesters' side as they witnessed the scale of the proposed destruction. What the human observers couldn't see, but Ethan perceived clearly, was the gathering of forest creatures behind the tree line. Hundreds of animals had positioned themselves strategically throughout the area, awaiting direction through the communication network, now functioning at full capacity thanks to the deployed countermeasures. Dr. Marlowe consulted with security personnel, clearly recalculating the public relations implications of forcibly removing peaceful protesters under media scrutiny. Her frustration manifested in a terse command to technical staff who began unloading equipment from specialized vans. "They're setting up enhanced disruption technology," Ethan warned Samuel quietly. "Military-grade versions of what they've been testing." Samuel nodded, retrieving a leather case from his truck. Inside lay an artifact Ethan hadn't seen before, an intricately carved signal horn made from a single piece of ancient wood, its surface inscribed with the same spiral patterns as the stone amulet. "This was carved from the first tree that grew in the stone circle," Samuel explained, placing it in Ethan's hands. "Used for generations to call the forest guardians in times of greatest need." As North Vale technicians activated their equipment, Ethan felt the forest communication network waver. The countermeasures still functioned, but struggled against the increased power of the new disruption field. Even Aurora's powerful mind touched his with growing difficulty. The moment for decisive action had arrived. Standing at the boundary between forest and development, Ethan raised the signal horn. Its sound, neither fully musical nor simply noise, resonated at frequencies that seemed to bypass normal hearing. vibrating directly in the bones and deeper tissues of all living things within range. The effect was immediate and unprecedented. Behind the human protest line, the forest came alive with movement as animals emerged from concealment, not in panic or aggression, but with deliberate, coordinated purpose. The wolves appeared first, Aurora at their lead, arranging themselves in a visible line at the forest edge. Behind them came deer, foxes, countless birds settling in branches, even the ancient bear standing upright at the center. The construction crews froze at the sight of this impossible animal gathering. News cameras swung to capture the extraordinary. Seen predator and prey standing, together in what could only be described as a united demonstration of wildlife resistance when North Vale security moved to activate sound-based deterrent systems designed to drive wildlife away. They discovered inexplicable equipment failures. The animals remained unmoved, their collective presence creating a living barrier between the machines and their forest home. Most remarkable was the effect on the equipment operators themselves. Several removed their hard hats and stepped away from their machines, unwilling to proceed against what they perceived as something beyond normal wildlife behavior, something that stirred ancient human recognition of communion with the natural world. Those animals know exactly what they're doing, one bulldozer operator was overheard telling his supervisor. I didn't sign up to fight against something like this. The disruption technology's effectiveness collapsed entirely when Ethan activated Reed's final countermeasure, a harmonizing device incorporating elements from all forest ecosystems, positioned at the stone circle and triggered remotely through Ethan's enhanced connection with the communication network. Dr. Marlowe, witnessing her technological advantage neutralized and her workforce increasingly hesitant, strode directly toward Ethan. Her clinical detachment had given way to barely contained fury and fascination. "You're doing this," she stated flatly, too quietly for the media to overhear. "Somehow you've replicated Reed's work, but far more effectively than our models predicted possible." "Not replicated," Ethan corrected. "Completed. What Thomas Reed began wasn't about control or exploitation. It was about remembering how to listen." Her gaze shifted to the assembled animals, clinical assessment replacing momentary awe. "Do you have any idea what applications this communication ability could have? The potential value to research, military operations, intelligence gathering? We could offer you the same things you offered my grandfather before you drove him into hiding." Ethan interrupted, Aurora moving protectively to his side. "This isn't a technology to be owned, it's a relationship to be honored." As they spoke, the media documented the extraordinary standoff, corporate machinery versus peaceful human protesters supported by an unprecedented gathering of unified wildlife. The imagery powerfully conveyed what legal arguments alone could not. The living forest standing as a conscious participant in determining its own fate. The dramatic standoff at the forest edge became the tipping point. Images of animals standing in apparent organized resistance alongside human protesters dominated national news cycles. Environmental organizations leveraged the unprecedented footage to rally public support. Indigenous rights groups highlighted the cultural significance of the contested lands. 3 days later, a federal judge issued an emergency injunction halting all development activities pending comprehensive review. Investigations began into the irregular permitting process that had allowed North Vale to bypass standard environmental protocols. Financial News reported major investors questioning North Vale's handling of the situation. Their stock price falling as the controversy expanded. Dr. Marlowe made one final attempt to salvage the project, approaching Ethan privately with an offer of collaborative research that would balance development with conservation. Her corporate facade cracked when he refused, revealing the obsession that had driven her pursuit of Reed's work. "You don't understand what you're protecting," she argued. "This communication ability could transform human understanding of consciousness itself. The military applications alone are exactly why it needs to stay protected," Ethan interrupted. "My grandfather understood that decades ago. The corporate retreat began the following week. Equipment disappeared from staging areas. Disruption devices were removed from the forest, though several were conveniently lost in the process, allowing Ethan to study their technology. Most significantly, Northvale's primary investors withdrew support after internal documents leaked to media, revealed the company's awareness of watershed contamination risks they had publicly denied. As spring warmth transformed the forest, Ethan devoted himself to preserving and organizing Thomas Reed's research. With Samuel's guidance and Jacob's technical assistance, they established a comprehensive digital archive documenting both the scientific findings and indigenous knowledge about cross-species communication. "We need to protect this information while making it accessible to the right people," Ethan explained as they worked in the renovated cabin, now serving as their research headquarters. "Not hiding it completely, but ensuring it can't be weaponized." The Tribal Council formally designated the forest region as a protected research area under Indigenous management, with Ethan officially recognized as lead researcher continuing Thomas Reed's work. Environmental organizations established a conservation easement for the surrounding lands, creating a buffer zone against future development threats. Most remarkable was the ongoing evolution of the forest's communication network. With disruption technology removed and countermeasures maintaining enhanced connectivity, the ecosystem demonstrated increasingly sophisticated collective intelligence. Species that had never historically cooperated began showing coordinated behaviors. Ecological balance shifted toward greater resilience and diversity. Aurora remained Ethan's primary connection to this expanding consciousness. Though aging now, the Silver Wolf's mental presence remained powerfully clear. Through her, Ethan learned that she had indeed known Thomas Reed, not personally, but through the memories passed from her mother, who had been one of Reed's original research subjects. The wolves maintained generational memory more effectively than any other species. Ethan explained to a small group of carefully selected research assistants being trained in basic communication techniques. They function as the primary record keepers in the forest network, preserving information across decades. Younger tribal members showed particular aptitude for the communication methods Ethan taught. Several demonstrated natural ability similar to his own, suggesting that the memory keeper gift might be more widespread than previously believed, not limited by bloodline, but by opportunity for expression and development. One autumn evening, as golden light filtered through the trees surrounding the stone circle, Ethan sat in quiet communion with the forest consciousness. Aurora rested beside him, her once silver muzzle now frosted with white, her powerful mind still vibrant despite her aging body. Through their connection came impressions of completion and continuation simultaneously, cycles closing while new ones began. Aurora conveyed understanding that her physical life would soon end, but her memories and essence would transfer to the collective consciousness she had helped nurture across decades. Most powerfully, Ethan sensed the presence of Thomas Reed, not as supernatural visitation, but as living memory preserved within the forest network his research had helped illuminate. His grandfather's knowledge, experiences, and intentions remained accessible through the very communication pathways he had dedicated his life to understanding. "The memory keeper is never alone," came Aurora's impression. "All who served before remain within the remembering." As darkness settled over the forest, Ethan returned to the renovated cabin where Jacob waited with their evening meal. The walls now housed research equipment alongside indigenous artifacts. The space transformed into a living laboratory where science and traditional knowledge complemented rather than competed with each other. From a specially designed case, Ethan retrieved the stone amulet that had first awakened his abilities. Its spiral patterns caught the lamplight, seeming to shift and move, as though alive with the consciousness it had helped him access. "Aurora showed me something remarkable today," he told his grandfather. The communication network extends beyond individual lifespans. The forest itself remembers everyone who ever served as its voice, including Thomas Reed. Jacob nodded, understanding dawning in his weathered features. That's why he wasn't afraid to disappear. He knew he wouldn't really be gone. Outside, the evening chorus of the forest rose in harmonies that seemed increasingly deliberate, increasingly communicative to human ears, now learning once again how to listen. Within that tapestry of sound, those with the gift could discern distinct voices, the wisdom of countless generations of both human and animal, guardians who had maintained the ancient covenant between consciousness and wilderness. Ethan took his place among them not as controller or even interpreter, but as participant in a dialogue far older and more profound than human civilization itself, a conversation between species that had never truly fallen silent, but merely waited patiently for humanity to remember how to hear it once again.